Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and we'll continue on with our faction versus faction matchups. This was a subscriber was requesting for me to make a video to review the Chaos Demons of Khorne versus Necrons. Surprisingly, it seems like the Chaos Demons have been getting a little bit of love recently, because a couple people have been asking me to make some videos for them as they're struggling with the faction. Which is not surprising, because your opponents pretty much know what you're going to be bringing, because they don't have enough variability with builds, which makes them a hard faction to play against certain matchups for sure, because your opponents are always going to be building to counter you. So I'm not surprised that somebody's having a lot of trouble with this Chaos Demons versus Necrons, because I think that's actually probably the hardest matchup for the Chaos Demons out of every faction here. But if you're struggling with certain factions, shoot me a message on YouTube and I'll try to make you a video. I had somebody ask me for a Orc versus Tau matchup, so I'll upload that one after this video. And then I think I'm going to be ready, after playing a bunch of matches online, to start going through each one of the Imperial Guard units, kind of giving my 2 cents on them and some different builds with the armies. And then after I've gone through those units, I'll come back to the faction versus faction matchup again. But if there's certain, like I said, matches you guys want me to focus on, then please shoot me some messages and I'll just write them down. And after we finally make our way through the Imperial Guard units after these 2 faction versus faction videos that were requested this week, then I'll come back to it after we finish the Astra Militarum, because I know you guys have been patiently waiting for me to start uploading more with those units here, but I wanted to complete the tournament matchup that people may have been invested in and give me some time to do a bunch of matches and get that set up so I could get a little more experience with them to kind of give you some intelligent feedback. But moving on here, if you're enjoying these type of videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. And let's get started on discussing the mechanics of this matchup. Like I said, it's a very hard matchup here because the Necrons really have everything they need to counter you and some. The biggest issue you're going to run into with fighting Necrons is that resurrection ability that they have is going to be a complete nightmare for you, because you're going to be finding that a lot of your units are going to be overkilling the Necrons, and then they're going to get resurrected and come back up. And even 2 units of Immortals with that with a Tesla cannon is going to be a nightmare for you with the Living Lightning ability. So the big thing is you need to have your guys spread out and then group them together when you're attacking, and then spread back out again, so you don't end up having all your guys getting totally blown apart by the Necrons when they're doing their follow-up shooting phase. You also really need to focus down the enemy heroes. So if you see where they are, you need to really make that a high priority to take those guys out. Otherwise, they're just going to be summoning scarabs on you every turn. And 2 scarabs against pretty much any of the Necron forces, maybe other than the Soul Grinder, because he has enough armor. If you get rear attacks, they're going to do significant damage to you. And then you're going to have issues killing enough of those models to really counter those damn scarabs, and they're going to be locking you down, so it can be a real nightmare. So definitely wanting to focus those guys down as fast as possible. And then the other recommendation I would have is try to also focus down on killing units that don't have the resurrection ability. That way, once they're down, they're just down, and you don't need to worry about them anymore. And I think that's critically important with, say, the Annihilation Barge, because that's going to have a free Living Lightning Cannon attack every 2 to 3 turns. And then even its standard weapon, most people aren't going to bring out a dual Tesla cannon on that, because they're going to want to use the regular cannon to focus down your summoners here, because they can snipe down, the Bloodthirsters, the Demon Princes, the Bloodmasters, Soul Grinders, Skull Cannons. It can do all those things, and it hits pretty accurately. And if you let it build up too much momentum, which is actually pretty easy for the Necrons on this matchup, because they can get a lot of kills with that unit, then it's going to be healing through a lot of the damage you're doing. So you definitely want to focus those guys down. And then the same thing with the Tomb Blades, because if they're going to most likely just have it set up with the Tesla cannon, and they're just going to be able to do hit and run on you. And since they have 5 movement, that's more than most of your units can go, even with their charge ability. So they can really effectively kite you. So you need to definitely focus those guys down, and then they don't resurrect at all when you destroy the models. So definitely keep that into consideration. Like I said, the frustrating part with this matchup is the sheer amount of scarab swarms that are going to be coming in on you, because they have more scarabs than you do like bloodletters. So what I recommend is just bringing at least a few fleshhounds, not a lot, because the fleshhounds are really not that good against the Necrons. The only thing they have going for them is that increased movement to help lock down some of those highly mobile forces. But the one benefit they do have is they have that flame attack that I think it's a 3-turn cooldown, 2-turn cooldown, the Burning Roar. So this is really your way to counter those scarabs, is by doing these attacks. Unfortunately, the Scent of Blood, which is really how these guys are really good against organic units, because you can effectively move them 5 and then you can still do a charge attack for a couple of movement. And then you can get them positioned in a way where you can guarantee that they'll get a rear attack. This is just totally nullified because it's only organic units, so none of the Necron units are considered organic. So you effectively can't use the Scent of Blood at all for the whole match. So keep that into consideration, because I've run into that issue that I didn't realize it was only organics, and I know newer players who really like to do Fleshhound builds with their Chaos units will sometimes bring those out, and then they'll get real pissed off that they can't use their charge attacks because they're positioning them in a way where they're going to start stacking up the charges, and then they can't facilitate those charging attacks. So just be aware that this ability is going to be completely unavailable for the whole match for you. So you're going to be relying on these, fang attacks, and with an armor piercing of 3, other than taking out death marks, warriors, and flayed ones, these guys are not going to be doing much damage for you unless they're getting rear attacks. The other big thing is you just need to know when you're selecting units which ones have the unstoppable ferocity, and then you'll want to move those units and then try to spread out as many of those Overwatch attacks onto different units as you can to really stack up that plus 25 evasion. So when you're able to close the distance and get these guys into melee the following turn, hopefully with having that 35 evasion here, these guys will be able to survive enough that you can keep guys locked in to melee combat, because that should lower their accuracy by 40. And that's how you can really mess up the Necrons, especially if you can stack that up with your tier 1 ability, which is that Veil of Blindness, because that'll slow down movement and accuracy. So between that and the accuracy penalties with the melee engagement, that's how you can use that to work to your advantage. Now, the other thing that's real important on these units is you need to be able, for general strategies, you need to keep your summoning units alive, because you really, by the end of the game, you're going to be doing a battle of attrition here, and you're going to need as many models as possible. So by being able to summon in, these demonic rituals, you're likely only going to be getting 2 summons per turn or per match, because most matches, especially if you're doing a Surge of Command, is going to be 8 turns long, and so with a 3-turn cooldown you're going to be able to do 2 summons. So your summoners would be the Bloodthirster, the Demon Prince, and the Bloodmaster. So again, you need to really keep these guys alive to be able to summon as many guys as you can here. Let's say you have 3 of these guys, so that would be 6 additional units, 2 per Bloodthirster, which is another 4 units, plus or minus more if you have the Demon Prince with you. So just keep these things into consideration when you're moving your guys around, because that's of critical importance. Likewise, you need to be hyper vigilant where those death marks are, because not only can they use their dimensional gate to get themselves warped out of close quarters engagement, they'll have that assassination mark target or whatever it's called, and that'll increase their crit chance and I think damage, or is it, no, it's accuracy and damage, if I or crit chance if I remember correctly. And that can be a real disaster when they start sniping down your summoner units here, especially the Blood Masters, which are particularly sensitive to that sniping, given that they only have 180 health with 5 armor. So they're likely going to crit you pretty substantially with that, and so you need to be very, very careful. So in terms of why I like to bring out these units, like this would be an example of a matchup or an army I would bring out against the Necrons, and the reason is the Bloodthirster is going to be your main damage dealer, as he is all the time. The big thing with him as well is he has probably the highest amount of movement on turn 1 out of any unit in the game. Especially with his dreadful wings, because, you know, that'll move him up to 7 plus 2 action points, so he can move 9 tiles on the first turn here with his flying. So what you'll want to do is, on certain maps, you can potentially capture 2 strategic points on the first turn with this guy, and so you're going to want to try to rush those points as fast as possible, and that way you can have him recharging his flight, because it has a 3-turn cooldown on the flying ability, and then you can also have him getting ready to, you know, then hide and then summon on the 3rd turn here, and then on the 4th turn you'll be running in and then flying around to try to get into position where you can end up using your Great Axe of Khorne to do substantial damage. So you can use that to, you know, take out the Tomb Blades, take out the Annihilation Barges, assassinate enemy leaders. Just remember that when you're using the Dreadful Wings, and I think this is kind of a frustrating thing, but you do suffer a 20% accuracy penalty, and you also get no evasion bonuses, and this is the only flying ability that I think in the game that doesn't really give you much of an evasion bonus. Maybe, actually, I think the Necrons don't either, now that I think about that. But a lot of the time when you're flying, you will get a little bit of a bonus, whereas here you don't. And if anything, it penalizes you with that accuracy. And that 20% accuracy is actually pretty substantial, because you think, oh, 90%, that should put me at 70%. But then once you start taking into the other penalties, 70% can be quite low with your attacks, and he quite frankly will miss one of those attacks. And given that he's pretty much just a big, beefy HP pool, the following turn everybody's going to shoot into this guy and kill him, so you really need to make sure that you're landing those 2 attacks to get your money's worth out of this guy. And so by getting in side attacks, or more importantly rear attacks, you'll still have, you know, that 90 to 100% hit chance even after using the Dreadful Wings. So definitely try to get this guy into a position where he can get some flanking attacks when he does that. But that's the most important thing with the Bloodthirsty here. And then kind of other little techniques to know about it is just always remember that you can increase momentum gains with your other demons by having this guy around, so that can be enough to give you some bonus attacks. And then if you are having trouble dealing with scarabs, because let's say your flesh hounds are getting destroyed by the end and he just keeps summoning all those scarab swarms on top of you, remember that you do have this insensate rage ability. And as long as this doesn't graze, which shouldn't be happening with psychic attacks, 11 to 15 damage should be enough for you to wipe out the scarab swarms. In the past, this used to not be sufficient because the scarabs used to be able to resurrect, but that is not the situation anymore. So you should be able to take out a lot of those scarab units. And then also remember that this does momentum damage to everything within 3 tiles. And momentum for the Necrons is how they decide how much they're healing per turn. So if you're having issues where they're about to end up surge on you, say if there's a Plasmamancer and you don't want them to use that quantum orb on you to just blow up all your forces with a highly buffed unit, then for sure use the Insensate Rage here and get some of that momentum, and then increase your damage by 25% and try to get a kill. So definitely keep that into consideration, and those are kind of how you would use the Bloodthirster on this matchup. I like, you know, pretty much every match you're going to want to, against any faction, you're going to want to bring as many Blood Masters as you possibly can. because for 120 point or 110 points it is, you know, you're going to be able to summon additional units. And let's say you get 2 Bloodletters, well, that's, you know, 120 points right there. If you get 2 Fleshhounds, that's 150 points. If you get 2 Blood Crushers, that's, you know, 180 points. And then if it's 2 Skull Cannons, that's 260 points. So all of that by itself is more than what you're just bringing out for the Bloodmaster himself. And then if you can keep him in a situation where you can buff up your guys, you know, he'll increase the armor penetration, and the damage with everything within 2 tiles. But you'll want to keep this guy into cover so he doesn't get sniped. But he will buff your guys to help you do additional damage. So you got to kind of weigh the cost benefit about bringing this guy into combat. If you find that there's like 2 units left in a squad, you can move this guy in, soak up some Overwatch to increase his evasion by 25, which will then bring him up to 45 evasion. And then I would use this guy not necessarily to fight full squads, but because of his splash of 3, I like to use this guy to mop up kills. So let's say I've taken out a bunch of Immortals with my other units and 2 Resurrect. Well, then I run in there with the Bloodmaster and I use him to mop up the remnants of the squad, or if there's 3 or 4 units left. Now, if there's warriors or something that you know you're going to be able to get some kills, then, you know, go ahead and attack them. But for the most part, I use this guy to mop guys up, and then I just use him to run behind a corner and hide, because I need him to stay alive to buff my guys, and then again to focus on the summoning. So him fighting is the least important thing, but that's how I tend to use this unit here. The Skull Cannons, they're meant to be most useful on the open maps because the Skull Cannon itself has 5 splash damage, but it really has an optimal range of 7, so you want to be able to be as close as possible to be able to get those, or to, you know, to get to that optimal of 7. So you want to have an open map for you to be able to shoot that, to be able to get the splash and really weaken enough forces that you're attacking, that then you can mop up the units and get the kills with like the Bloodletters or the Fleshhounds. So then they're able to reanimate, and hopefully you'll get the kill when you're getting the follow-up attacks. But even if you're in a, you know, closer map, these guys are still viable because you still have your charge attack. And you have to remember that the charge attack itself has 5 armor piercing for anybody it runs through, with a splash of 5, I believe. And then the unit that it crashes into, it still does 90 to 120 damage with an armor piercing of 8. So that allows you to really mess up the Necron Lords, Lich Guard, all those units that are Praetorians, all those things that tend to be a little bit harder for your Necron guys to get the kills on. You can just do a bunch of charge attacks to focus those guys down. But just remember that that triggers Overwatch attacks in any zone of control. So remember to use your Bound in Brass and Bone here to get that 25% armor or damage reduction before you use that charge attack there. Then you leave yourself stuck in the middle. So definitely remember that. But, you know, again, shoot from range, weaken guys down, and finish them off with your infantry is the way to go. Sometimes you'll just have to attack the units twice because you won't be able to get a squad wipe with that splash damage a majority of the time. And once you totally wipe out a full squad, then, you know, you can trigger those 2 reanimations that then these guys can run in there and finish them off. But generally they're not great at attacking armor because, you know, you're doing 30 to 40 damage with armor piercing of 5 here. So your other units are going to be what you're using to focus more on your heavily armored units, unless you're able to get these guys within charging territory. And then remember, it only has a 2-turn cooldown, so you can use these guys to just charge over and over and over again during a match, as long as you can keep them alive. So you just got to be careful you don't overextend these guys a little bit too much. Like I said, the Fleshhounds I like to bring out because they have the increased movement there, so it allows you to get into position to hold points. They have enough health that as long as their back is covered, they can usually tank several rounds of Scarab attacks. And then they also have the Burning Roar, so they can wipe out Scarab swarms when they're over there attacking these guys, helping them stay alive. And if they stay grouped together, then you can end up taking multiple out with one attack as well. But because the Scent of Blood is not able to be utilized on these guys, and they don't have a ton of armor piercing with their attacks. I don't make them the mainstay of our forces because they just can't do enough damage output against most of the Necron units with their higher armor for it to be effective. For that reason, I end up thinking the Bloodletters are a much better option. You know, they're 15 points cheaper. Yes, they have less movement. They also have less armor, which is unfortunate, and health. But because their attacks have 8 armor piercing, and if you start stacking them up on each other, you can end up getting the Murderous Tide to really start getting out of control, and that's how these guys do a lot of damage. So if you have one all by themselves, it's pretty mediocre with their attacks here, and at an 80% melee accuracy, these guys miss more than you would think. But once you start adding these buffs in, then they can just really do some significant damage. The important thing, though, is, again, because they have lower health, they have lower armor, you can't leave the turn with these guys all grouped together getting that Murderous Tide bonus. Sometimes people are like, oh, I'm going to keep them together, and then if they try to run away from me, I'll do all this damage, which will happen. But what is also likely to happen is they're just going to use those Tesla carbines on these guys and then just destroy full squads of these Bloodletters and then the guys that are next to them, because they have pretty high chances of arcing with their attacks. In terms of some potential good alternatives, I would say the Demon Prince is always a good alternative if you want to bring out more summoning units. The big thing for him is if you can't quite get guys into melee range, he can shoot, and he has 2 splash damage, so he can be used to mop up enemy forces. But what would be more important for him is that if you have a lot of cover, then you want to bring out this Hellforged Sword, because he hits pretty accurately at 90%. He has a 5 armor piercing, and then he has a splash damage of 3. So this guy can really chop apart immortals and things like that without much difficulty. Never go for this Demonic Axe, though. This thing is just shit. I don't understand why it costs so much for what it does. I mean, you're effectively getting 2 armor piercing, and it's slightly increasing your base damage, but you lose all of your splash. This is just a terrible, terrible upgrade. Maybe you could use it on the Astra Militarum to help you cut through tanks a little bit better, because they're going to be using a highly mechanized force, but oh my god, especially against the Necrons, do not do that. You're going to hate your life if you do that. Use the Hellforged Sword instead, and then remember that you have the Talon attack, which also has splash damage, so that will help you get additional squad wipes with units. And then remember that this Might over Magic actually lasts 2 turns. It doesn't always say that on the definition or the description here, again, which is something that frustrates me, is it doesn't tell you how many turns it lasts for. But it lasts for 2 turns, so if you have everybody around you, you can buff up their damage by 25% and their accuracy by 5%. And then remember, once he starts to get injured, you can hide him, and then you can just start using the Demonic Ritual. Now, it does take 2 action points anytime you use a summoning ability, but you can still attack if you have the Talons ready for the free attack here too. So just keep that into consideration. This guy can definitely be a very viable option if you have a close encounter map. But on the big open maps, a lot of these big guys here, as you can see, you know, he has minus 15 evasion, he has minus 20 evasion, he has minus 25, minus 15. So against a ranged faction, they can just blow these guys up without much issues, because they have such a high hit chance with your low evasion chance. So that can be a real nightmare, but he is definitely a very viable option. In terms of the units I would recommend not ever bringing, I would say the Soul Grinder. I think everybody knows my significant animosity for this unit. It is such a letdown because it's a great model, but it just cannot do what it needs to do. It's like they couldn't make up their mind what they wanted this guy to do in terms of his attacks. And, you know, I don't think they'd have to make a lot of changes to him to make him an amazing unit. But, you know, his big thing is he's meant to be your really powerful armor-piercing ranged unit with these 3 attacks, armor-piercing is 7. Problem is they don't have splash damage, so you're going to be overkilling Necron units. I mean, yes, he can do good damage against, like, Tomb Blades and, you know, the Annihilation Barge and, you know, Commanders if they're in the open. But everybody else, he's going to be way overkilling them with his ranged attacks, which just doesn't feel good. And you're like, well, let's bring him into melee. Well, his melee only has 2 freaking splash. It's like, give this guy a shit ton of splash damage, man, because that would totally change the situation. You know, give him 5 splash or something. So then it's like, this guy's just an absolute nightmare in melee, because you have a free action here that is also his claw, and it does 67 to 90 with armor piercing of 7. So it's like he's got this good attack in melee, but then this one is not very good, and so it's like you gotta run him all the way across the map to not get into melee to use his because it's like, oh, we'll give you his best weapon at range, but your free attack is in melee, but then your melee attack sucks. So it's like, what do you want me to do here? Because it would be cool if you kept them in the melee, you locked everybody up. You're just doing shit tons of damage as you would think you were supposed to here. I mean, yes, you can still give them this viable harvest cannon, or even give them a little bit of splash damage, something here to just make it more viable against most squads. And then when he blows up, you know, then he has this blowing up thing, so you could also use him as like a kamikaze melee guy too, but he's just not in a good way. And because the Necrons have so much armor piercing, they would just blow this guy right out of the water before he can even get anywhere near getting 250 points of damage. Because it's like, okay, I'll bring this guy here, whereas I can just bring a Demon Prince for the same amount, who can then summon and do additional damage, and he has more splash damage, and he has pretty decent accuracy range damage. It's like, it's just not a good spot. I mean, the Demon Prince is just way, way better than this guy is here. So I definitely don't recommend bringing him for all those reasons. The other one I don't recommend bringing is the Blood Crushers. Perhaps you could make an argument that with the Devastating Charge, you could Devastating Charge through the Scarab Swarms to help you get through the Scarab Swarms, and then with their armor of 6, they may be a little bit better at holding points than your Flesh Hounds and your Bloodletters. But the problem is there's only 3 models here, and most of the Necron units with their armor piercing are going to be able to shoot these Blood Crushers down from range, and so they still are not tanky enough for you to be able to hold the point against fire. And then in terms of their regular attacks, if you're trying to use them offensively, you know, effectively these are just 3 regular Bloodletters that are on a Blood Crusher here, and they just don't do enough damage there. And then their Devastating Charge, you know, it does 15 to 20 damage with armor piercing of 4, and then it only does 22 to 30 damage with armor piercing of 5 when it finally lands its charge. So it's just not enough damage to make these guys really work. Because I mean, for most of the Necron units to, like, say, take out a squad of Immortals, that's probably 3 charge attacks. I guess you might be able to do it in 2, but I think the Immortals have 50 to 60 health, if I'm not mistaken. So if you don't, unless you roll the highest damage on your charges on every model there, you're going to need 3 attacks to be able to kill one of those units. And you know, they're like, what, 100 points at baseline and 120 with the Tesla Carbine, if I remember correctly, and then you're using 270 points to wipe them out, and then 2 of them are going to resurrect anyways. It's like, what is the point of this? And they can just run away from you, and you won't have enough damage output to really suppress a lot of units. So for that reason, I don't recommend using these Blood Crushers either. But if you are, I would use them to hold strategic points. Is kind of my 2 cents on there. So I hope that helps you on your matchup there. It's definitely a very, very challenging match, so don't get discouraged with a Khorne versus Necron matchup if you're getting the shit kicked out of you, because that's likely what's going to happen. It is a matchup against a faction that's really meant to counter you, and it can do it hard. And, you know, the Chaos Forces really can have a lot of trouble killing those units. because of the lack of splash damage for a lot of their non-hero units. So good luck is all I can say, and hopefully you can get some little robot skulls for the Skull Throne here, assuming Khorne would be willing to take them. If there's certain faction matchups you'd like to see, send me a message through YouTube and I'll try to focus those for you. Like I said, the next video somebody wanted was an Orc versus Tau, so I'll get that uploaded, and then I'm planning on starting to make my way through the Imperial Guard units. And then once I complete that roster review, then I'll come back to these faction versus faction matchups. So if you have certain matchups, like I said, send me the messages and I'll write them down and I'll start putting them out in terms of either what people ask for the most or whoever, in whatever order I receive those requests. So thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you are, please give my channel a like and subscribe. Encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.